As some of you know, I have a new weekly Substack. It's basically a weekly column, and this week I used that space to talk about two issues that I actually get a lot of questions about that I don't talk a lot about here because, frankly, they're what I call dead rail issues. And what do I mean by a dead rail issue? Well, as you know, we talk about third rail issues in politics a lot. And what do we mean by a third rail? Well, it goes back to the whole idea of electrified rail and subway systems. It's an issue that you're not supposed to touch, or it will literally electrocute you, politically speaking. So for a long time, the most famous third rail issue was Social Security. You touch it, you die politically. I would argue Medicare has joined that club. And I think after the 2026 midterms, we will say Medicaid is also a part of that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are all now third rail issues. But we'll get a final confirmation on Medicaid after the 2026 midterms. They're untouchables. They're basically popular across the board. They got 60 to 70% acceptance rates with the public. They're seen, if you want to call them entitlements, safety nets, but they're seen as things that they're no longer nice to haves, they're must haves as far as the public is concerned. And any serious talk about reform usually ends up with somebody losing an election, because reform for many people is code for cutting back. And that is one. And look, on Medicaid, I think the reason why this has become such a popular issue is, when it first came about, it was thought of as just welfare for the poor, that this was healthcare for poor people. Medicaid is a lifeline for a lot of people now. At the end of life, you've run out of money, there's Medicaid. You're in your middle, you're in the middle-aged brackets, if you will, in your 50s. You got kids in college, you got parents that are aging, you can't afford to support them all. And so Medicaid is an important safety net for a lot of people. I think that's why Medicaid itself is going to be considered a third rail. But what about the opposite of third rail issues? I'm going to call these are issues you can ignore, abuse, or exploit even, and suffer no political consequences. It's issues that voters barely notice unless you ask them about it, and they end up eventually shrugging them off. I call these dead rails. You can touch it all you want. You can sleep on that rail, and nothing's going to buzz you. So I'm going to talk about two of them, and they're two issues that actually should be urgent priorities. They're two issues I get a lot of questions about, one from one side of the aisle and one from the other. But I would argue they have bipartisan blame written all over them. One is mostly championed by the left, one mostly by the right. And both are really about right and wrong, not left and right. But both are stuck in a permanent cycle of neglect. I'm talking about campaign finance reform and the debt, or fiscal responsibility. So let's start with campaign finance reform. When I first started in this business, a big conversation was all about soft money. This was the unlimited donations you could give to political parties. Everyone was trying to figure out how to limit it. Because, donors were having too much influence on the two political parties. There were efforts to clean up the system, close loopholes, cap donations, increase transparency. And yet every single time a law was passed, McCain-Feingold, the most prominent, that was intended to reduce the influence of money in politics, it actually ended up increasing the amount of money and, most importantly, pushing that money out of sight. It was no longer transparent when it was inside the parties. So new loopholes popped up, new vehicles for influence. Suddenly money started pouring into places we didn't even think of as political, super PACs, 501c4s, 527s, shell organizations, all of it designed to move large sums of money with minimal transparency. Pre-McCain-Feingold, all of that was transparent. And here's the thing, both parties do it. Democrats have built massive dark money networks. Republicans have their own versions. And each side says the same thing when you question them about it. We don't like the system, but if we don't play the game, we lose, or can't go to a campaign with one arm tied behind our back. So it's not reform. That's arms race logic. Our campaign finance system today is like late stage baseball before the pitch clock. Hyper optimized, hard to follow, and totally alienating to the average fan. It's become less about voters and more about who's got the best finance shop, who's got the best new vehicle to move money before the other side sees it. Now let's talk about my other dead rail issue. It's the debt. This one's even easier to track. You can basically set your watch to when people start pretending to care about the debt. Republicans, for example, only worry about the debt when a Democrat is president. Democrats rediscover deficit hawkery the moment Republicans propose a tax cut. I mean, just look at the last few decades. Clinton raised taxes to bring the deficit down. He was told the markets would reward him, and they did. We had pretty good prosperity. And yet that blueprint has never been followed again. We had balanced budgets for a few cycles, few 2-year cycles in a row. We didn't pay down we actually even paid down the debt a little bit. By the way, deficit and debt. Deficit is the annual budget, when we don't meet our budget targets and when we have to borrow on the credit card, that's the deficit. The debt is the accumulation of those annual deficits, if you're trying to understand the difference between the two. But the Bush years came after Clinton. We had tax cuts, 2 wars, and a brand new Medicare entitlement. Remember Part D, prescription drugs, all of that on a credit card. The debt exploded. Obama comes in during a recession. Stimulus spending had to, right? Bailouts, Republicans cry foul, but where were they a decade before? Trump takes office during an economic expansion and passes another massive tax cut, unpaid for. The debt grows again. No one blinks. Biden inherits pandemic spending, also growing the debt, adds trillions more in new programs, also growing the debt, and every turn the debt only grows. And politicians only seem to care about it when they're not the ones holding the checkbook. But here's the dirtiest secret in Washington. Most of the money that gets spent in politics is spent to get more money out of government, either via a loophole or a subsidy. So think about that. Nobody donates millions to a super PAC because they want government to shrink. They want tax breaks, or they want a subsidy, or they want a contract, or they want a carve out. Whether it's direct spending or indirect giveaways, the goal is the same: return on investment. Those donations are not just out of the goodness of their heart. And that's where these two dead rails meet. And maybe these dead rails can produce a little bit of a voter electricity. Campaign finance corruption fuels bad fiscal policy. Big money shapes big bills, and neither party is serious about fixing either problem. So why doesn't this resonate with voters? Well, there's a reason. It's invisible until it isn't. The debt doesn't hurt until interest rates spike and you can't afford a home. Corruption doesn't sting until you see how a bill got written, and even then the outrage becomes fleeting. So let's be honest, the people who do care about these issues, the messengers, they're often written off, treated like cranks, purists, or out-of-touch do-gooders. But what if we brought these two groups together? What if the campaign finance reformers and the deficit hawks stopped working in silos and started working in tandem? Because the connection is clear as day to me. If you want smaller deficits, you got to get money out of politics. You can't have one without the other. As long as billionaires and corporations are shaping legislation behind the scenes, there's always going to be more spending, because influence costs money, and that money only gets more spending. So that's the challenge I want to pose to you, the listeners, the readers, the political obsessives, even my fellow cynics out there. What would it look like to combine these two issues into one political movement? A third way, perhaps. How do you get voters to care about things that they can't immediately feel or touch right away? Who could be the messenger for something like this? A voice that doesn't get dismissed as a scold or an ideologue. Ross Perot came close back in 92, and he got both parties to rethink a few issues. But here's what I do know. Our campaign finance system is broken. It's legalized bribery. I've said that before. It is worse than ever. And the fiscal trajectory is unsustainable. Even now, the bond markets. The markets had a lot more openness to our debt to GDP ratio, but they're getting a little nervous now that not only are we growing things, but we are not even... With the party that claims to be the fiscally responsible party is even worse, more fiscally irresponsible than the other party that has the supposed reputation for being big spenders. This is why the bond market traders are panicking. Both problems, though, are being driven quietly and predictably by the same small group of players. They write the bills, they fund the campaigns, they manipulate the marketing, and they don't care if you wear a MAGA hat or a climate pin because they bought both teams. Both sides are captured by their big money special interests. So maybe, just maybe, it starts calling these issues what they are. They're not third rails, they're dead rails. They're issues that go nowhere unless we decide to bring them back to life. So I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me a note at askchuck@thechucktodcast.com. Would love to hear your thoughts, your ideas about how we can somehow take these two issues. And again, campaign finance reform is something I hear about from my friends on the left, and focusing and getting the media to focus more on the debt is the conversation I hear on the right. I want you two groups to meet with each other. Don't just expect us at the press to figure this out. Although I think it's a pretty easy connection to be made. But if you're truly concerned about this trajectory, I think the two issues go hand in hand.